I want to thank everybody for joining our webinar today. Pinnacle IP Solutions has created a series of webinars that vary from introduction of our company to detailed design of optimized networks, as well as the top 3 ways that companies can lower operating costs in their businesses today. We're not planning to dazzle you with graphics, but more communicate our strategy and ideas, as well as how they might relate to your business. We've only got about 15 slides to show you today, so we're not going to overwhelm you with PowerPoint. But again, this is a discussion about our approach and the potential opportunities for your business. Now let's get started on the content. So Pinnacle IP Solutions was created by market demand, following a successful 25-year career as an industry executive and leader with companies like Rogers, Delphi Solutions, and MTS Allstream. Our co-founder, now current president and CEO, Kevin Watson, provided consulting services to many of the industry's leading technology firms and service firms, which include Mitel, Cisco, HP, Time Warner, and Cox Cable, to name a few. The only way to really create value is through understanding and knowledge. By really understanding how your customers communicate, you can design and deliver solutions that improve their workforce effectiveness and efficiencies. The first pillar in our own foundation is knowledge, and as such, we act like a business, IT, and communications consulting firm. We engage our customers and analyze with key user groups to understand how they communicate. We seek to understand the business processes that drive their roles and function, and we leverage that knowledge in the design of our overall solution. A key piece of that is obviously through understanding, and finally, knowledge and information. Now, we want to create a baseline for future discussions and to get you thinking a little bit about your business and how you might approach common problems with a fresh approach. Not a radical change or radical ideas. In fact, it's a very simplistic and straightforward approach that most of the executives we talk to totally understand and appreciate. Over 80% of the businesses and executives that we talk to were able to improve services and support and at the same time lower their operating costs. And 80% of those customers referred us to another business that they worked with and that we were able to attract and earn as a new customer. Now, we really believe that that is a key testament to the work that we've done and provided to our customers. And part of the way that we do that is by looking at key user groups, again, to better understand their unique needs and stress points, which we can then leverage in our solution design and focus. We take a look at a couple of key areas that we highlight. One is sales and marketing. The other is operations, management and executive, as well as administration and finance. And in addition to that, we view 2 key technology platforms as part of that core: voice, PBX, or business phone system, as well as data and infrastructure. Now, when we talk about the different groups, sales and marketing obviously is responsible for an organization in helping to drive revenue and build brand awareness. Operations is obviously responsible to deliver the products and solutions that a company sells. Management and executive, obviously, to not only set the strategic direction of the company, but also to help manage and execute that strategy effectively. And finally, administration and finance, whose responsibility is to support those key user groups. Now, when we take a look at the technologies, and in particular the inner edge, what we see in the inner edge is the devices and applications that drive differentiation into the marketplace. So think of things in a business like being able to respond quicker to customers' needs, which ultimately results in increased revenue and decrease in customer attrition. Think again about things like applications that enable collaboration, which provide better customer service and again increase revenue and decrease customer attrition. Think about data gathering and mining and a way to better understand your customer needs and challenges, and again increasing revenue and decreasing costs. And finally, cost analysis and management and lowering your overall operating costs. These are areas of the business that companies usually invest in to create differentiation, and they're the areas that can drive a tangible return on investment. So the devices and applications drive differentiation for the business and organization. And now let's take a look at the next area, which we call the outer edge. And in the outer edge, it represents really the network services that drive and support the inner edge devices, the applications, as well as the technology. While they represent the conduit to supporting those applications they represent, the greatest cost and in many cases the least efficient aspect of a company strategy. many would argue, and we would agree, that most companies have become very good at procurement. So given that they know exactly what they need, they're able to source multiple vendors and get quotes. They're also able to pick the best value based on that criteria. But really what's missing, and what we hear is missing from our customers, is the integration and unification of those various elements in that strategy. So what if you could buy these services wholesale or at a discounted price, and then integrate and unify them so that they leverage their own unique strengths and had them work together then independently? Would that in some way offer an improvement in the way that you do business and ultimately lower your operating costs? So we believe that integration and unification leads to optimization, and ultimately when we look at the way in which we want to support our customers, that becomes a true differentiation for us in helping to understand and optimize what they have in place. So first, by understanding the core, we better understand the company's true requirements and how we can improve the way that companies and key user groups communicate. That collaboration and support to their customers is really critical in the way that they differentiate themselves. And from that perspective, we're a consulting firm. Next, we push that knowledge to the inner edge where we create unique solutions, design, and introduce applications that improve the way that companies communicate, providing real differentiation for them in the marketplace. And from that perspective, we're a systems and solutions integrator. And finally, we leverage the key aspects of a network service strategy and fine-tune each element. We integrate and unify those elements to lower cost, and that cost reduction provides the funding necessary for improvements in the inner edge. Increasing bandwidth is one thing that we can drive. So internet and business line capacity can be improved. We can lower costs with long distance and toll-free and other related services. And we can introduce new technologies and services and applications like cell phone features and bundling, SIP trunking or IP trunking, dynamic extensions, virtual marketplace presence. And in that way, we're both a network services integrator and broker. And what we aim to do is to introduce new technologies and applications through that process and improve overall performance. And by improving overall performance, ultimately lowering costs. So from that perspective, we represent a number of different aspects as it relates to this communication strategy. Now, one thing that we talk to people about, and they ask us a lot, is, how much time is this going to take? I mean, you're talking about a very complex strategy in many cases, and how much work do I have to do before I really understand whether there's a good value proposition there or not? Now, the reality is that while 80% of our potential customers were able to realize a true and real and tangible savings and return on investment, we can't say for certain at any time that any business will be able to do that. But some of the things that we have been able to achieve with a number of our customers is to fully fund a new strategy with those savings and efficiencies. In addition to that, after the investment of the technology, to lower their current operating costs and to realize the many benefits that we provide. But again, before you invest your time and money, how do we qualify the opportunity for your business? So we've created a number of tools that helps our customers and potential customers provide that baseline of expectation. And one of those areas is an ROI calculator that we have on our website. And in less than 5 minutes, you can get a quick snapshot assessment. And that assessment obviously can help you understand the question as to why. Why would I invest time and or money with Pinnacle IP Solutions? So if we take a look now, we have an opportunity through the ROI calculator, again, that sits on our website, to be able to go in and take a look at an average business. And as I mentioned, it takes roughly 5 minutes to walk through that. But some of the things that you're going to see in this ROI tool, one is customer testimonials here that walks through some other customers and some of the things that they found, the ability to get to live support if you have a challenge, and ultimately being able to enter in information here on the ROI tool. So for the sake of this exercise, let's walk through, and we'll call this test, and we'll label it as March 7th. The company will be Pinnacle, And the current provider, as you can see here, it shows you where to look at your telephone bill and understand who your provider is in certain cases. And let's say, for instance, in the east of Canada, that's Bell. Now, if we're looking at an average company and we're trying to figure out what they look like, let's say we're going to take the average company that we deal with that has 50 to 100 employees. Let's go with 100 employees because it'll make it easier to walk through. How many of those employees work from home or remote location? It doesn't have to be full-time employees working remotely. It could be people that sometimes work from home, maybe 1 or 2 days a week. Maybe you've got somebody on maternity leave or a salesperson that might have a home office. So let's make that number as 10. How many workers require a cell phone? Well, today, in today's day and age, we're seeing that 50 to 60% of company employees actually have a cell phone. So let's use the lower amount, which is 50%. What are the number of salespeople in the organization? 10. How many call center agents do they have? And many companies don't have a call center agent, but they do have people within the organization that respond to customer calls. They could be a technical group or they could be a sales group. So we'll put that as 3. How many total phones or appliances do they have? Normally, by rights, there's about a 10% overhead on phones for common areas like lunchrooms, lobbies, boardrooms, and so on. So we'll take the 100 and mark it up and come up with 110. And what you'll see here is this will enter in what the average was for the original cost of the system. And again, using industry averages on pricing that we know and are aware of, we can come up with what we believe that amount to be. But let's say, for instance, you said, well, you know what, I didn't pay that amount for it. I didn't pay 68, I paid 65. So you can change that amount so it's a little bit more intuitive for your needs. And what's the age of the system? If you enter in anything under 4 years, it will leave in lease cost or depreciation because you're either leasing it or depreciating it. And if you enter in more than 5 years, let's say 8 years, which might be more the average, it removes that. And it gives you an option if you're looking at a replacement cost of that system, what it would be. And it also gives you the ability to layer in maintenance and upgrade costs. So maintenance costs, again, are based on industry averages. Upgrade costs are based on the same. Now, in a standard company of this size, one of the questions is how many moves, adds, or changes are done. And that historically would be people, maybe a couple of times a month you're making changes to personnel or adding personnel or revamping some specific aspects of your communication platform. And so we'll put in 2. And you'll notice that it basically auto-populates the average price along with what the average equipment price would be to enter in there. The other thing is, which is a big factor as people look to move to voice over IP, is what is the infrastructure cost going to be able to support a new IP type platform? So let's assume that you have a digital or analog system today. In order to support phones, you need to get power and signaling to those devices. And traditionally that would mean that you have to put in new cabling and separate cabling for voice if you wanted a separate voice infrastructure, which we would recommend. I could talk about that later. And you'd also have to have power over Ethernet to be able to power those phones. So Numerities came out with a study that said the average cost for LAN readiness was about $421 per station. So what we've used here is 65% of that amount, assuming that there are some things that you could repurpose within your infrastructure today. And again, that amount gets factored into the overall assessment. How many phone lines do you have and how many PRIs? Well, a PRI, as many people will know, is basically a big pipe with a number of individual lines coming in. So that is actually 23 lines plus a data channel comes into a PRI. So of a business of this size, 110, let's assume you have one PRI, which is 23 lines. And you'd have a number of different analog or local voice lines to support things like faxes and modems, as well as backup that you may want to have beyond the PRI. So we'll enter that in as 5. And again, over here, there's explanation for each of these areas to help you, if you have a question, be able to assess that question. Now let's take a look at current internet needs. This particular company, we'd say, has one internet at a cost of $500. Now, there's various flavors of internet, and you'll know yourself what your current costs are. But you could have, obviously things like DSL or ADSL. You could have T1s. You could also have fiber or an aggregated network strategy in place. But we'll go with the average for now. From a long distance perspective, this company's spending about $1,200 a month in long distance at 6 cents a minute. And again, this gives you the ability to make some different changes and calculations here if you like. Or if you're more effective in paying less than 6 cents a minute, you could put that amount in here. And then ultimately the business cellular cost, again, is based on industry averages. So our calculator, because we do business not only in Canada, but in the United States and Europe, our calculator is intuitive enough to know that based on where you're filling out the calculator from, you'd have the ability then to be able to enter in your amount for number of users, and it would intelligently, on the back end, tell you what those costs would be. So in Canada, as an example, the average cost of a cell phone for an enterprise customer is $100 per month. In the US, it's $85 per month. In Europe, it's $65, and in Western Europe, it's $60. Now, we're at the point where we filled out all the information. Obviously, it didn't take us that long, and we say we want to calculate our savings. So this tells us that in this particular case, that the company would be able to save 15% after the investment that's been made in technology and upgrades to the different network services. So the total monthly savings for this customer is $1,400 a month, which represents $14.49 per month per user, or on average over 3 years of $52,000 saving. So think about your business. If you had $52,000 to invest in something in your business, what would that be? This gives you a way to do that. So let's enter in an email address here, and I'll just do admin@pinnacleips.com. And what you can do here is, if you want to get details on this and have this printout as opposed to in this type of format but mailed to you, you would simply say, I would like that. Do I want to get or receive more detailed analysis and quote? At this point in time, no, I don't. And I can take a look here at the technology benefits that I would receive based on some of the things that I looked at. So a secure and enriched connection for all users, unified mobility creating substantial efficiencies and savings, mobile printing, enhanced customer service and communication, one number dialing, to mention a few. And the best applications for you would be secure unified communications, remote teleworking, audio and video conferencing, presence and collaboration, as well as mobility and others. So again, up here, we filled this out. We simply say receive the details. And what happens is that information has now been sent to you that you can then take a look at. So, as quick as it came up, here's the information that was sent. Test March 7th, Pinnacle. No, I don't want to receive anything as of yet, but it lets me know what my 3-year savings are, what my total monthly cost would be, and ultimately calculates that for me. So a fairly useful tool for most people, obviously, to take a look at that. And now I just have to get out of this part. Now, the other thing that people say is, while obviously this sounds good, tell me a little bit about some other customers that you've worked with that have had success. And I don't necessarily want to read each of them, but just to tell you that there are many, many customers that we deal with and hundreds of accounts that we've done this type of work for. Many of the people that we deal with give us unsolicited testimonials and tell us a little bit about what their experience has been. In addition to the experience that they've had, they refer us to other customers. And as I mentioned, about 83% of the people that we do business with do refer us to other customers that we end up working with. And that's something that we believe is probably the biggest testament to what we do and what we've been able to provide to our customers. Now, in order to go to the next step, which would be talking a little bit more about requirements, when we come in and do our analysis, one of the things that we look at is we review the current contract or current costs of network services and those associated contracts to understand the usage details and where the money is being spent, as well as when the contract expiry dates are so that we can mesh that up with our solution. As I mentioned before, we interview people from each of the identified key user groups to understand how they communicate and operate as well as do their jobs, what business processes that they do to make sure that we fully understand how they operate so that we can improve that and take their consideration and needs into consideration in our design and engineering. We want to discuss the goals and expectations of a company, and many people have a pretty good understanding of what they do well today. They also have potentially some concerns in respect to their current setup and their current platform. And they may have issues that they need to be addressed, like they're realizing that as they've moved more to a cloud-based strategy, they don't have enough bandwidth for their users, and they're seeing a real slowness of key applications. Or from a mobility perspective, they're doing a more effective job in pushing applications and technology to their users from a remote perspective, but their costs have escalated. They need to find a way to control that. And then finally, identifying 3 things that would have to happen for you to personally view the engagement as valuable. So those are the type of things that we go through in the requirements. Now, in the end, one of the things that we talk about, and we mentioned earlier on, is that we strive to be a business partner, not a provider. As I mentioned, companies are pretty good at procurement, but when we ask people, think of all those elements that are representative of your communication and IT strategy. Things like your business phone lines, your long distance and your toll free, your internet access and maybe applications that are in the cloud, your cellular and mobility strategy, your business phone system, your data network and infrastructure, as well as the desktop user support and the applications that reside on those desktops. How many different people do you deal with on a daily basis, on a monthly basis, to deliver that total solution strategy? And how effective are those companies today in collaborating on your behalf to deliver an integrated and unified strategy that's optimized, that's future-proof, that's taking into consideration your needs as an organization, as well as the changes that are happening in the industry from a technology perspective? And most people would say, I don't think that's happening. In fact, I'm sure it's not happening. And then the next question we would ask is, of all of those people that you deal with, how many of those suppliers would you view as trusted advisors? People that you could consult with as you're looking at your business and looking for ways in which you can grow and expand and do things more effectively and efficiently. And again, most people would respond that there's not that much there. And that while they do have good services from a number of the different partners, the reality is they don't have an integrated strategy and they probably do have inefficiencies. And so when we take a look at really our webinar and our webinar series, and we've been doing these for a little while, we look at a number of different aspects. And some of the future webinars that we have scheduled, one is the top 5 applications for businesses today, and we take into consideration both the mobile workforce as well as a standard and extended office, integrating your network services and some real details as it relates to integrating the different elements that you have in your strategy today. A lot of people have questions today about SIP and IP trunking and, concerns about quality. So another one of the webinars that we're going to be doing is SIP and IP trunking and quality assurance network services. How do you deliver a resilient and integrated network strategy? And is there a way in which you can actually do intelligent routing? Is there a way in which you could assess whether a call path is clean or not? Let's say you wanted to go out over voice over IP, and if that path wasn't clean, could you route it an alternate way? And instead of just, utilizing the internet from a Wild West perspective for voice, is there a way in which you can control that? And the answer to that is yes. Cell phone integration with things like twinning and being able to leverage Wi-Fi, designing the right voice LAN infrastructure, and taking into consideration and maximizing on some of the investments that you've already made there. And then finally, lowering operating costs, the top 3 things you can do as an organization today to lower your costs. So ultimately, today what we wanted to do was lay the foundation of the organization for you, tell you a little bit more about our capabilities and what we've been able to do, see if through the process there are different needs and requirements that you may have, and if so, what those requirements are. So as I mentioned earlier on, we wanted to walk through this process, and we were going to, take some information from people from a chat perspective. And so I'm going to answer a couple of questions. Again, we wanted this to be about a half an hour, so we're just right on track. We have about 5 minutes more for questions. So we have a question from one of the participants, which was John, and he's asking a little bit about IP and the comment that I made about a diverse network strategy. So John's question is, how is it that you go about creating a diverse network strategy to take advantage of voice over IP, but not to necessarily have the inherent problems that people see with things like quality? So, John, first of all, that's a great question, and I'll try and answer that the best that I can. So really when you take a look at voice over IP and things like IP trunking, and remember that voice over IP, like digital and analog, is primarily a protocol, and that protocol is how different elements communicate together. But let's take a look at the traditional way in which people have voice over IP. So there's different elements and ways in which you can design a strategy. First of all, if you decided to go 100% voice over IP and eliminate some of those tried and proven and reliable networks that you'd see like PSTN, which is business lines and fax lines, you could definitely do that. But you do introduce some risk into your equation. So understanding that the business phone system is setting up the call, and then it's pushing that call out over the data network, that data network being the internet, connecting through to an ISP or service provider that's then giving you voice trunks on the back end, right? And so when you consider those four elements, the business phone system, routing or managing that call and traffic over the internet, and then to the provider, you need to ensure that each of those elements are communicating and operating at the same level and at the same language. So what happens at times is changes are made to that network and some of the different providers, and if that is your one and only path, and there is a change that takes place, sometimes you can experience things like dropped calls, jitter, or one-way audio. And those are traditionally what you see. Now, Pinnacle has a strategy that's a little bit different than this all or nothing. What we believe is that you can create a diverse network strategy and leverage some of the strengths of each of those elements. So let's take the first one that I mentioned before, which is your regular business phone lines. You know, today you have a situation where you've got your phone on a separate LAN connected to a separate network, and you have 5 nines reliability, which most people have come to expect. And I think that's what you would expect when you're looking at new network services. But the reality is there is potential challenges. So what we do is we actually design a diverse network strategy. And what we say is we're going to put on top of the phone system a border gateway. And that border gateway's job and responsibility is for something called intelligent routing. So if you're going to make a local call, well, why not just use your regular analog or copper line or your digital lines? Because there is no increased toll or cost in going out over that way. But if you're going to make a long distance or in particular an international call, if you went over that same business line, you might be paying, locally 10, 15 cents a minute, or as we mentioned earlier on, 6 cents a minute for North America. And if you're going internationally, you might be paying as much as 30 cents a minute, or if you're calling a mobile number in Europe, you might be paying $1 a minute. So the best path for that would be to go out over your IP trunking, where you might only pay 2 or 3 cents a minute. So as long as the border gateway is in place and designed and engineered properly, it's going to look for that first path of preference, which is your least cost route. And it's going to look at the path by sending a signal out over that network. And it says, that's a clean signal, that's a clean network, I'm going to go that way. Or conversely, before that call is made, that isn't a clean path, I'm going to route it out over regular copper lines. Now, it doesn't mean that you'll eliminate 100% of the time some of the challenges that you might face when a call's in place and there is a disruption of network. But what it does is ensures that 90% of the time as you're making a call, you're going to go out over the best path, the most reliable, as well as the one that's going to be the cheapest. So how do you design an IP strategy? You don't go all or nothing. You utilize and leverage the strengths of the technology that's in place. And if you have it designed and engineered properly with the border gateway, you can eliminate most of the challenges that people face. So I hope that answered your question, John. I've got another question here from Terry. And Terry's asking a little bit about cellular. So he's mentioning that in his organization today, what they've been seeing on a cellular basis is that their costs have continued to increase. And in particular, as they've introduced smartphones, they're seeing more and more utilization of the services, which is great, but they've also seen an increase of costs somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 to 50%. And is that typical, and how do you manage that in particular when employees have those devices that they're taking home that they could be using personally? So I think that's a really good question, Terry, and in fact, it happens to be one of the weakest points in a company's communication strategy. Now, not to say that it's weak from the perspective that it's not doing a good job, which is to provide the same type of connection and access to technology that a user would have in the office while on the road. And in fact, because of some of the changes that we've seen in network services from a mobility perspective and introduction of networks like LTE, we're seeing an individual user that might have the same or greater access to bandwidth capacity than what they might have in their office. So things have definitely changed from a remote perspective. And our workers and our skilled workers are obviously more accessible. And that obviously has a big impact to being able to respond to your customers quicker, generate more revenue, and reduce costs. But to your point, it is an area in which we see escalation of costs. So how do you best manage that? Well, most companies have their cellular managed by an administrator within their organizations. And while they do a good job, the reality is they don't understand the different nuances of creating the right strategy, the most effective way to manage that strategy, and in particular, they don't have the buying power to be able to leverage different things like pooling and special features and plans and other things. So what we do is we analyze, as we mentioned before for the other areas, detailed usage on the individual users. And we put together special packages and plans and pooling to be able to lower costs. And on average, we're able to lower the cellular cost by somewhere in the neighborhood of 30%. But more importantly, we've got different things built in place that allows us to control and manage those costs on an ongoing basis. And we provide a simplified management and billing strategy where we let you know at a corporate level those things that are effective. We make recommendations to introduce different elements into your plan to address gaps as a company or gaps as individuals for usage and costs. And what we see is not only a reduction of initial costs of about 30%, but the ability to manage those costs on an ongoing basis to keep a more consistent cost and predictable cost for the future, and being able to manage those costs so that you don't have the spikes that a lot of people see when they're, in particular, traveling, roaming, and other things. So that's a good question, Terry, and I'm glad you brought that up because it is important. Now, one other thing that I want to mention on the cellular side is, what about if you had on your cell phone an application or applications that gave you the capability to integrate with your business phone system? And think about that for a second and what that might mean. So let's say we introduced on your phone and your device a collaboration tool that would give you the ability to see all of the people in your organization, all of the contacts that you have both on your cell phone as well as in your company directory, which might be Outlook, the ability to collaborate with those people while you're remote and on the road, the ability to get visual voicemail as opposed to just voicemail to email notification, and making you more effective by being able to create statuses and letting people know, what you're doing. So if someone was to call you internally through the company, whether you were at your desk or you were on the road, you could let them know that you were in a meeting, and it would automatically let you know based on your Outlook calendar and what you have put in for, your own activity. And then furthermore, what about if that application could actually be the conduit to being able to be your gateway for your calls? So one of the areas in which cellular is very ineffective is when you're roaming or when you're making long distance or international calls. That happens to be the area that most people have most of their overage charges. So if you're going to make a call, as we mentioned earlier on in the business, and you're going to make a call internationally, well, that call might be as much as $1 a minute on a business telephone line, anywhere from 30 cents to $1 a minute internationally. And we know that national or North American calling is anywhere from 3 to 6, 7 cents a minute. But if you were to make that same international call on your cell phone, that call might be as much as $3 to Japan. If you made that same call over IP, you might be looking at a call that might only be 3 cents. And again, if you did it over your landline, it might be 30 cents. So if you had a $3 cost, or a 30-cent cost, or a 3-cent cost, obviously your preference would be to route your call over the 3-cent. So there's an application that we have the ability to put on the phones that gives us the capability to understand that when you're making long distance and in particular international calls, why don't we route that call through the PBX, out the cheapest path with quality, so that again I can control my costs. And I can consolidate those costs into the business phone system where there's the border gateway that can do intelligent routing, and I can do better management of my costing. So that's just another way in which we layer in applications and integrate different technologies to be more effective. Now, again, we're running a little bit over, but there's one more question that we've got here that I want to answer. And again, that came from Gary. Now, Gary was asking a little bit about the process again, and how is it that Pinnacle engages with the company? So what I would say to you, Gary, is that we do the majority of the heavy lifting, right? So let's assume that we've gone through the process, and as we showed earlier on, that process might have included the ROI calculator. So let's assume that we've gone through the ROI calculator and we've determined that it's worth your investment and our investment. It's been qualified. What we need from you as an organization is really 3 months of billing, 3 months of consecutive billing of those various areas that represent a cost center. So we'd like to see bills on your business phone and fax lines, your long distance, and your toll free. We'd like to see your charges for your internet. We'd also like to see charges for your cell phone. And if you have a cost associated with managing your current business phone system and or your data infrastructure, get those to us as well. While that's happening, which in most companies, finance or the CFO would put those together in a couple of hours because they're just pulling it out of the historical files that they've got, we have a group of analysts that will be analyzing that information. And while that's happening, we would ask that we get an opportunity to speak to some of the key user groups. So again, before when we talked about key user groups and understanding, what we want to be able to do in the core is interview someone from sales and marketing, someone from operations, someone from management and executive, as well as administration and finance. And if there was other areas in your business that you think need to be represented, then obviously to allow us to do that. So let's assume that we met with someone from each of those different areas and it was half an hour each. We're talking no more than 2 hours. And from that, we probably have as much information as we need, and in some cases we'll get into a lot greater depth depending upon the questions that we've got, to be able to ascertain their needs. And at the same time, if you did have someone that was responsible for IT and support of your end users and desktop, we'd like to spend some time with them again to understand their unique needs and what they see from a business perspective. And after we're gathering that information, while our analysts are reviewing and analyzing the billing and costs and usage, we now have a foundation to be able to create the total strategy. Now, how long does that take for us? Probably a couple of weeks, and it really depends on the complexity and how much information that we get and how long it takes to meet these key user groups. But realistically, at the end of a 2-week period, we should be able to come back to you with a strategy and along with costing, and hopefully a fully cost-justified strategy. The other thing is, we also want to understand how you would expect to be supported as an organization and what things are important to you. So it's not really that complex, Gary, as it relates to the involvement that you need to have as an organization. And while it is very complex in developing the strategy, from our perspective, not only do we develop it, we also help you execute it, and we help you manage it, and we support it for the life of the agreement, which would also include keeping things like software current for the life of the relationship. So it's not just that we have a theory that we put together. We start with knowledge, we build the strategy, we layer into devices and applications those things that are going to make you more effective. We review, analyze, and optimize the network services and come back with a total strategy offer. Now, I have another question here. I'm not sure who this is from, but I'll just answer it. The question is, what about if we didn't want to go with an entire strategy with Pinnacle, but maybe there was an area that we felt we could improve upon? Now, those are the type of questions that we get asked a lot. So, again, I don't know who asked for that question, but here's what I would say. As I mentioned, 80% of the people that we deal with, we can deliver this best-in-class strategy, fully managed and supported for the life of the agreement, kept current, and 80% of the time we do that for the same or less money. But there's the other 20% that we haven't talked about. And let's talk about those 20% because I think this would fall into the category that you're asking. In certain cases, people have already made an investment in certain technologies or network. Maybe they have a long-term commitment on a specific contract, or they've been very effective in certain ways in which they've executed that strategy. So when we come in and do the analysis, we approach it the same way all the time. But sometimes what we come up with is, here are the 3 or 4 things in your current strategy that we believe to be effective, or things that we really can't impact until the contract expires in X number of months or years. But in the rest of your strategy, here's a couple areas that we think we can make a huge impact, and one might be cellular. So let's assume that you're spending, we talked a little bit earlier on about $100 per user and 50 users on cell phones. You've got $5,000. Here's an area cellular. We can actually improve what you've got, increase your availability of minutes, increase the features and benefits that we've put in place, add in specific elements that's going to make it more effective, and reduce your cost by 30%, which means you're going to be saving $1,500 a month. You can then choose to either put that straight to your bottom line or reinvest that back into your business in other areas, maybe areas that we've identified as needing improvement. It could very well be that you're doing a lot more cloud-based or software as a service-based strategies. And if that's the case, you might need your internet beefed up. And again, now you have the funding for that. So overall, we can tackle as much or as little as we need. And, one of the sayings is you don't eat an elephant in one bite. So, a lot of organizations have spent a lot of time, money, and energy creating the current strategy that they have today. And sometimes it takes a while to improve that. But there's always elements that we find in which we can find a short-term and mid-term gain while we work towards developing and building for your organization the right long-term strategy. So I hope that answered your question. Now, the last thing is, obviously, we've gone over here a little bit. So I just want to say a couple of things. First of all, I want to thank everybody for, the opportunity in participating in our webinar. While we didn't today get into anything necessarily specific, we did talk about a couple of different areas in which a business can focus some efforts and maybe work with Pinnacle on improving their strategy. I do want to mention that there are a number of future webinars that we have coming up. And if you want to find out more about, some of those specific areas that, might be able to be of benefit to you, we would ask that you go to our website and register for those different webinars. And it's as simple as clicking on the box up here, and as you do, being able to enter in for future webinars. I'll wrap up with telling you a little bit more about the website, and hopefully this will give you a way in which you can further communicate with Pinnacle and understand a little bit more about what we have to offer. But again, as I mentioned, one of the biggest things that we do with a company is help them improve what they've got and optimize their current spend. And you'll see here this savings calculator that we talked about and we showed you about earlier on. So that comes up right away. When you're talking about other things like the benefits, we've got the different customer benefits that are here listed on the website in the scrolling screen. There's the ability to go into Save on Corporate Cellular. If you click on here, it'll actually take you to some information that we have from a cellular perspective. And furthermore, you can go deeper into our customer testimonials and the benefits from a cellular perspective. So hopefully, if that's your need and requirement, you go to there. We also have things like audio conferencing services. And, audio conferencing today averages anywhere from 8 to 15 cents per minute. We have an audio conferencing service that starts in 5.5 cents per minute. So if you want to find out more about that, again, you can click on there. It tells you a little bit more about our audio conferencing. And you have the ability to go in again and see more testimonials and information about the service. So if that's an area that you have as a need, then definitely click on that. From a voice over IP network design perspective, again, you have the ability to click there, find out a little bit more about some of the things that we do to optimize, upgrade, and fix and improve the current network design. And again, testimonials from a number of customers along with benefits. So what we've tried to do is create a website strategy that gives people the ability to leverage the website to find out more information, to be able to access the different tools and resources that we have, as well as webinars. We've got information on business phone systems as well as hosted, network services, including corporate cellular, the business phone lines, the SIP trunking, and network aggregation that we talked about. We have the ability as well to take a look and take advantage of certain applications, like our online backup and recovery, our cell phone twinning, our audio conferencing. And then we have a list of our locations, our advisory board, our executive, some different Q&A and customer surveys. We've got a section with our company news that talks a lot about what's happening with our organization. And then we also have white papers that you can access as well as an online store. And the online store would give you the ability, if you were looking for certain things as it related to either, traditional peripherals like headsets, phones, online training, or different specials, that you could access them from our website. So we hope that you get an opportunity to leverage the tools that we've put in place, that you get an opportunity to ask relevant questions to us in the different formats that we provide, and would encourage you to join our future webinars to be able to understand a little bit more about the products and services that we offer, but more importantly, how those will benefit you and your organization. So with that, we're going to wrap up the webinar for today. I want to thank everybody for taking the time. And if you have any questions, again, you can reach out to us directly, join us on an upcoming webinar, or even reach out to us through the website to get more information specifically about your needs as an organization and how to address maybe some of the challenges that you face. And on that note, I want to thank you and talk to you next week.